was derived from a word called Kybernetes, and what that means is a steersman or a governor. So already it's talking about controlling guidance and so on. Now it was first adopted in the 1950s by a mathematician called Norbert Wiener, and he used it to describe systems and their structures and their constraints. And he coined the word cybernetics from Kybernetes. Okay? Now today, cyber is a prefix used to describe a person or a thing or an idea as part of the computer and information age. Okay? So you hear a lot of cyber, cybersecurity, cyberspace, and all that sort of thing. All that means is, what we mean by the information technology and digital age, right? Okay. So, essentially cybersecurity is about protecting systems. And what do we mean by systems? It could be computer networks, electronic files, hardware, software, servers, and drives. Okay? So basically anything where you can collect data, or you can carry data, or you can store data. Okay? So what are we actually protecting it from? Well, cyber attacks. Okay? What this simply means is whenever someone is trying to gain access to a system illegally, okay? This is much akin to somebody breaking into your house. Okay? They're there to get something, to take your valuables and take it away. So it's illegal. It's a crime. People who commit cyber attacks are criminals. Okay? It is quite lucrative, but again, it's illegal. Once you get caught, and they do get caught, they go to jail for a very long time. Okay. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of cyber, because as long as we've had systems, we've had people who have wanted to build infiltrate and hack. Okay. So back in the 1900s, we had a system of communications called the telegraph. Everybody knows what that is? Yeah, okay. So what basically, it's like the telephone poles you see here with cable running over top. You had the telegraph, and it was a device, a metallic device, and you tapped it in Morse code, and it would send the signals to the recipient at the other end in another town, even the president, and so on. Now, highly vulnerable. It's very easy to intercept, very easy to tap, and mostly by the people at the end who are receiving the messages. So you have somebody at the post office actually sending the telegraph on your behalf. Somebody at the other post office or telegraph offices receiving the message, and they're writing it down on a piece of paper, and sending it off to the mayor or the president and so on, and whoever's conveying, guess what the president's up to, and they say over the dinner table. So it's not secure, this information gets out, which isn't good. So the next part of this century, it was a very interesting time. We went through two very big wars, okay? And it gave rise to a whole discipline of information security called steganography, okay? So this is a method of concealing messages, okay, that you want to send. If you want to send secret messages, you've got to make sure that they're concealed. And if you send them on a piece of paper, you get freaks down and they find the paper and they take it from you. So even before this, in ancient times, what they used to do is it has some really ingenious ways of sending messages. So they'll shave the person's head, tattoo a message onto his head, let the hair grow back, and send them on. It takes a long time, so they have to get more innovative in how they're sending messages. So in the Second World War, they were sending messages by code. That machine you see there is something called the Enigma machine. Okay, and that was actually invented by companies for banking purposes, to send transactions over wires to different branches and so on. But the Nazis adopted this machine and they modified it so that they can send messages from their military command to the field. And it was very effective. The Nazis thought that they were going to win the war with this thing, okay? And they might have, because it's very ingenious. They were sending messages over by code. nobody could crack it, and it was causing the Allies a whole deal of stress until somebody did crack it. So there was a fellow in the Polish intelligence office who cracked the code, okay? But cracking the code wasn't enough because he needed the key to actually decipher the code. So what happened is there was a French spy that went behind enemy lines, you know, to wherever, in Berlin or wherever, as a spy. So he infiltrated the, you know, the intelligence office or wherever. He actually found the code, stole it, took it back, got it off to this guy in Poland, and they cracked the code. They broke the Enigma machine. So all the messages for the Germans were sending now. It didn't matter anymore if it was easy to crack, it was easy to decode, and you know, so the Allies in the end won the war. You know, so it's an interesting piece of history there. Then we got to a stage, you know, in the it was, you know, 50s and up until about the 80s, and you know, we had things like phone hacking. We're not talking about your mobile phones, you know, somebody trying to hack your mobile phone. We're talking about physical payphones that you might have seen on the street. You don't see them around much anymore. I've seen a couple, you know, in shopping centers, but these things used to be, you know, on the street corners and whatnot. And what people do was they used to find ways to hack them because there were times, right? So you put in your 20-cent coin, and 2 minutes later it goes beep beep, and you have to put in another 20-cent coin. So if you're talking to your relatives overseas, it's very expensive. So people thought about ways in which they can hack the system so they don't want to have to pay all that money, you know, at the phone booth. So they figure out things like if you tie a piece of string to the coin, you tape it and you drop it in, it sort of keeps the latch open, so it tells the phone, you know, there's still money in there, and it doesn't need to time you out. And what you would often find is queues of people outside these phone booths trying to hack it, you know, and calling their relatives in Fiji or Lebanon or wherever it was, right? Because it was very expensive to make phone calls to overseas that time. So that's another hack. Then we got into the internet age, at 80s onwards. Not everybody had the internet in the 80s. You know, governments had it, some large organizations had it, and so on. But it was information, it was valuable information, and criminals were trying to get into it. So they uploaded worms and viruses and so on. And then, you know, from 2000 onwards, we really got into computers, internet was widespread. So we're looking at things like ID theft, you know, credit card fraud, that sort of thing. And just recently, lately, it's, you know, we've got state-sponsored cyber attacks. So we're looking at the Ukraine power attacks conducted by Russia. You know, so recently, you ever heard the Colonial Pipeline cyber attacks? You know, so that's suspected to be state-sponsored, and we'll get into that a little bit more as well. But you know, you got Julian Assange and WikiLeaks hacking into, you know, government service to find out information and link it out to the community, right? So it's getting quite interesting. So there's several different types of attacks, okay? And they're becoming more and more sophisticated. So security software companies are building systems that are trying to keep the criminals out, you know, so that it'll alert people that there's an attack that's happening or whatever. And they're quite often, they're not being detected because as sophisticated as the technology is getting, the criminals are also getting just as sophisticated. Okay? So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game. You know, we're chasing our own tails in some instances, but that's why this area of cybersecurity has become so important. You know, so by the year 2026, Australia is going to be short of about 17,000 cyber professionals. So it's a very lucrative career to get into if you're inclined to that sort of thing. Okay, and so cybersecurity, it's always going to be an issue for a very long time, just for that reason of the cat and mouse game. So one of the types of cyber attacks is called distributed denial of service. And this actually prevents users from accessing systems online services, and data, and other elements. And it's not intended to actually steal anything, right? It's just gaining access. And the motivation behind it is people they just want to cause trouble. You know, it's just the thrill of the attack. They just want to cause a little bit of anarchy in society. And this has a potential of costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, to organizations if their systems are frozen. They can't do anything. But for an attacker, with a little bit of ingenuity, it costs them less than $1,000, and even less than that, maybe less than $50 to write a bit of code or anything that they can upload into the system as malware or whatever to seize the system. Now, this happened in the 2016 Australian census. Okay, so the Australian Bureau of Statistics decided to conduct the census online for the first time. They'd been trialing in previous censuses for a very small sample, but they decided in the 2016 census, we're going to put it all online rather than sending people out with paper and dropping it off and having to collect it after it's been completed and all that. So on census day, what happened is during the daytime, in the morning, they suffered 2 cyber attacks. In the afternoon, and they got over those ones quite quickly. In the afternoon, they had to take the system down for about an hour. Then in the evening, they did it again. And then they decided, no, we can't deal with this, nobody can access, we're going to shut it down. It was a big controversy, it was a big embarrassment for the Australian Bureau of Statistics and by extension the Australian government. There's a whole inquiry into how it failed. And because the initial story was that, you know, the servers got overloaded because all of Australia was trying to get in that much. No, they had plenty of capacity. They prepared for that. It was a cyber attack, which brought the whole system down. It's very interesting. If yeah, have a look at that as well if you want. The cyber attack on the Australian census. Okay. Another type of attack that's becoming more prevalent is ransomware. So what the attackers will do is they'll upload a bit of malware into your computer, hack it. They'll take all the data, and they'll hold it for ransom. Okay, well, meet my demands, or I release it to the public. Often it could be money, often it could be other things. Now, there was an interesting case in 2014 with Sony Pictures. They're about to release a movie called The Interview. It's a comedy. And what it was about was the attempted assassination of the North Korean President Kim Jong-il. Okay? Now, there's this group called the Guardians of Freedom. That's what they called themselves, this cyber attack group. And what they did was they infiltrated Sony Pictures servers. They took all the data, so this was email files and all sorts of data, and even they got hold of unreleased films. Okay? What they said to Sony Pictures, well, look, if you let that movie go out, the interview, if that's released, right, then we're going to release all this information into the public. And at that time, President Obama got involved and said, look, we're not going to negotiate with criminals under no circumstances. And so what these people did was they started leaking the information. They released about 5 unreleased movies into file sharing servers and so on. They released some really embarrassing email documents, you know, what producers and directors were saying about certain actors and so on. You know, so it became very embarrassing for some pictures. What became apparent after a while that this was a state-sponsored attack by North Korea. You know, so you think about it, why would anybody really care about whether this movie is released? You know, so Mr. Kim Jong-il has got a bit of an ego and he doesn't like to be embarrassed on the world stage, so this is why they attacked so that the movie wouldn't be released. Okay? So that's ransomware. That's basically what that is about. Okay? Then we have something called social engineering, and this is a whole. It's probably the most popular one, and it's a whole discipline in itself. It's an art form, right? And this plays upon people's psychology, manipulates them into performing an action or divulging information. Now, there's a various types of social engineering attacks. The most common ones are phishing and spear phishing. I'm sure you've heard of phishing. Okay, so and it's done by email, right? So they'll send you an email, you know, hi, this is the bank, your account's out of order. Can you please update your banking details so that we can all the records? You know, your bank is never going to ask you for your banking details in an email like that. So that's a phishing. But spear phishing is when they target you specifically. They get information about you, okay, off your social media account, anything they can find out about you online. It gives them more information to be able to target you specifically. An example of this was in 2016. There was a Ukrainian hacker, and what he did is ingenious. Actually, is really intelligent attack. So what he did was he found out about a supplier for Facebook and Google based in Asia, who supplied them peripherals and that sort of thing. And he set up a fake email account within that company, within that supplier's company, started sending invoices to Google and Microsoft for goods that hadn't been received. So when the accounts people at Google and Microsoft, this plays on something called the familiarity bias, where it's, this is something they did every day, so it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. So they got the invoice from this company that's well known in Silicon Valley. It's providing goods and services to them. They said, okay, well, yeah, here's an invoice for what? They don't actually go out and check the inventory if that thing is being received. The invoice is being received and you pay it. So they're paying that invoice, but into a bank account for this particular individual. So this went on for about 2 years, and that criminal netted $100 million from both Microsoft and